Despite TF2 polling really poorly when I ask about it, I meet the majority of my fans in TF2. I don't get it. Here's a TF2 video. Mankind has always asked the hard questions. What is the meaning of life? What esoteric knowledge do the owls keep from us? Why do people still believe in the shrouded ghost when it's clearly as fake as the Imp Champion scroll? And most importantly, what team would each of the 9 murder boys belong to? Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, they're all on red, according to the videos. But then, what about Meet the Spy? What about these guys? Well, maybe multiple people fill the same niche on both teams. All of these guys are soldiers, but perhaps none of them are Jane Doe. There's also a theory that they're clones, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. So I'll be basing it off of specific details of the characters. Keep in mind, the comics are a jumbled mess that were written by living proof the Pinkertons are one of the worst things to happen to America, so please keep in mind that the characters will sometimes swap teams, and I'm just trying to establish what would make the most sense if they stuck to one. Let's start with Engi. This one's pretty straightforward. He's the only actual builder on the team, so obviously he'd be part of the Builders League. Their logo is a wrench, open and shut case, Your Honor. His canonical team goes back and forth, but he's been on Blue more often than the other mercs. His father also worked for Blue, which makes me sad that they never got to interact. Radigan worked for both, but he was hired by Blue first. Final verdict? Another easy one. Whenever a character has a weapon that specifically counters one class, that guarantees they're canonically on the opposite team. The Sapper is an anti-engineer weapon, and that's basically the only thing that warrants its existence, since Sniper otherwise does a better job at like everything except for wine tasting. I say this as a former spy main with no malice whatsoever. I don't mind Spy, I don't mind the Dead Ringer or anything, I don't mind Diamondback, it's just the fact that he's not a great class. Final verdict?
Red.
Next up is Sniper. Not only is the Razorback an anti-spy weapon, but the scar on his face actually came from the spy. Before the Meet the Spy video, he didn't actually have it. A scar wouldn't exist on a clone, so this is the real deal. That also implies he survived Meet the Spy though, and he looks pretty dead to me. I don't know, I guess it wouldn't be the first time Sniper's been resurrected. That being said, this was a red Sniper. Is it the same guy? No idea. And before you bring up the Darwin's Danger Shield as an anti-pyro weapon, no it isn't, go to the Spectator team and think about what you just said. You can be set aflame by the Cow Mangler, the Hong Kong Long Dong, or the Huntsman, and you don't need a pyro to light the arrow. Final verdict? Following that, let's talk about Pyro. My first thought is the Homewrecker, which is obviously an anti-spy weapon, comfortably placing him on the blue team. But I can do you one better. He also wears Engineer's Glove. Now, I know what you're going to say, that could just belong to an enemy engineer, it's not necessarily Del Conacher's. Well, dear viewer, that's where you're wrong. Pyro and Engi share a cosmetic called the Cute Suit. It gives them a turtleneck, but it also does something interesting to Engi. It gives him his missing glove back. Since Pyro shares this cosmetic, I think it's reasonable to deduce that this is Del's glove. Final verdict? There sure are a lot of anti-spy weapons, huh? Here's one that fits that description, but not in a way that you're expecting. While in-game, Scout uses the same color as his own team, that's actually not what the developer intended. Red Scout was supposed to hold a blue spy's arm and vice versa. Valve, in their infinite wisdom, changed this. Fuck Valve, I'm going to be going by developer intent, so I'm counting this as a point towards Scout being blue. For as much as I hate the comics, it does confirm that Spy and Scout are related, so it'd be safe to assume that they're on the same team, but two things. One, that's not a guarantee for previously discussed reasons. Number two, the comics are Tier 2 canon, whereas the game itself is Tier 1, so the game's logic comes first. Therefore, final verdict. The medic is an interesting one. I was originally going to give both teams a medic since there's an uneven amount of classes, but then I realized there's something I missed. Medic does have an anti-class weapon, and no, it's not the Vaccinator. That was invented years after the Red and Blue War ended, and it was anti-bot, not anti-pyro or soldier. No, what I'm thinking of is the weapon that no one else besides me sees the value in. The Solemn Vow. This weapon lets you see enemy health. Why is that important? Because there's only other one guy who can do that. The Spy. But this is a marble bust, right? I don't think so. Medic does have Spy's living head in his possession, so who's to say Spy isn't encased in there? I don't see any other explanation for why Medic can see your health, do you? Final verdict. Next up, Demo. See, Soldier and Demo kind of fill the same role in the team. I know they fill their niches, but for every sentry nest destroyed by a sticky trap, one could argue that the direct hit would have done the trick too. Point is, they're both the explosives guy, so I feel like they should be on opposite teams. Like Blue and the Wrenches, Red's logo is a cartoon bomb, just like the Demo's emblem. He was also red while Soldier was blue in the war update, and despite Soldier changing sides a lot, Demo has always been red in the comics as far as I can tell, and for what it's worth, his clan wears red too. They don't just happen to be wearing red, the lore calls them the Highland Demolition Men. He may not be related to the TFC Demo, but it's implied that his family has worked for Red at some point. Final verdict.
Red.
Given what I just said, that doesn't leave a lot of room for Soldier. If we factor in the explosive redundancy and Demoman is red, that places Soldier on blue. However, I have one more point to bring up. The gunboats. That's what makes the war update and their comic appearances firmly canon to me. As I said, gameplay takes over logic of the comics, and if this is both in the comics and the game, that means the comic is canon. So, final verdict. Last but certainly not least, we have Heavy. There isn't much in the lore to establish his allegiance, but I suppose it's worth noting that he's more often red in the comics. He also has Natasha, and while that can be useful against everyone, I think we all know it's designed to be an anti-scout weapon. Scout's blue, so that's another point for Red Heavy. Despite him being a counter-revolutionary, he has a lot of Soviet cosmetics, and they like to wear red. One of which being the Iron Curtain, which was supposed to have red on it, but it didn't in-game for some reason. Poker Knight, which I need to remind you, there's nothing indicating that it isn't canon, especially since it does fill the gap of where he got Max's head from. Heavy tells a particular story about torturing Engineer. If Engi's blue, you know what that means for Heavy. Final verdict.
Red.
Conclusion. While both teams likely have multiple people filling these roles, out of the characters we've actually met, 3 of them work for Red, and the remaining 6 work for Blue.